Well, as Tom mentioned, I've been out of mayor for about 12 years, and since that time I've worked with the Urban Land Institute, which is a real estate think tank in Washington, D.C. It has about 40,000 members worldwide. Started 75 years ago with the idea of really by a group of developers concerned about the quality of development taking place in cities around the world. We don't lobby for legislation. We really try to educate people about best practices, and it's given me the opportunity really to travel all over the world. I've been to 70 cities in the last year. I just was in Germany last year, and or last week, and that's what it's like. And what I've learned, one thing in all those travels and my experience in Pittsburgh, we started earlier than a lot of these cities. What I learned is every city in the world is trying to figure out their place because the rules are changing. So last week we were invited to go to Wolfsburg, Germany, which is the headquarters of Volkswagen. And there's a huge Volkswagen plant there that employs 60,000 people. And in 20 years ago, 3/4 of the people that worked in that Volkswagen plant were blue-collar workers. Today, there are still 60,000 people working for Volkswagen in Wolfsburg, but 3/4 of them now are white-collar workers. We toured the plant, and robots are putting the Volkswagen cars together, okay? And so Wolfsburg, the town, which was built around being a blue-collar, working-class town, is now trying to figure out how to recreate themselves so that the creative young professional research people that Volkswagen needs to be a competitive a company worldwide want to live in Wolfsburg. More than half of their workforce, their white-collar workforce, lives in Berlin, an hour away, because there's no like life in Wolfsburg. I can tell you that. I was there for a week. There's nothing going on, and so what does that sound like? It sounds like us. It's going on all over the world. Is what's going on, and that's why I want to talk to you about intentionality. About that we have choices to make. We made that choice in Pittsburgh. It was a difficult choice. Tom and Mike, listen, everything I will talk about, they were partners in. And in many ways, Mike gave up his political career to make some incredibly courageous decisions to position Pittsburgh to be what we are today. I don't recognize half the time when I'm in Lawrenceville. I was leading a tour a couple weeks ago, and I got lost in East Liberty. Because they've changed the streets. You know, I don't recognize the buildings anymore. They were all vacant when I used to be there, right? And so there's the forces of change. You can't ignore them. They're happening. And globalization, I mean, we've lived this, right? Where steel comes from and where our clothes come from and all that. Environmental issues. We are watching rain and torrential rain as I look out the window happen in a way where people could live and had a house, and now it's flooding. And we talk about 100-year or 500-year floods, but they're happening 3 times a year. And so we have to think about how we build and what we do. And technological innovation, I don't need to talk to you about all that. You're carrying it in your pocket. It is fundamentally changing how we talk to each other, what we do. Demographics, which I'll talk about a little bit. How cities are making choices about financing their future. And particularly want to focus on that in the Mon Valley, because I want to throw out some ideas for you. And the other big issue really is what's driving Volkswagen and all the companies is how do you attract talent? And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And so let me just touch on demographics. How many of you belong to AARP? Give it up. Go ahead. And you only have to be 50, right? If you belong to AARP, you know this month's issue, virtually every other month, they have articles about where the boomers want to live. And where the boomers want to live are walkable places, affordable places, places that are lively, that have opportunities to go, to go out, walk to a restaurant, to go out to a movie, and even more remarkably, our kids want the same thing. It's not working. No, it's stuck. Oh, got it? our kids want the same thing. There's 83 million of them, and a recent General Motors survey says that they are 6 times less likely to own an automobile than their parents did at 24. So our son, who's 28, we live on the north side, does not even have a driver's license. And so mobility, how people move around, becomes a really important issue. Whether it's transit, whether it's Uber, whether it's riding bikes, or whether it's walking, the choice is how communities build themselves to make it easy to move around is a big issue for people to think about. And so how we make those choices is about intentionality, is about your intentions of how the kind of community you want to have. Not, and so I know for 30 years there's been a conversation about a highway. While the highway can be helpful, it does not address a lot of the issues of mobility that you will want to deal with in the Mon Valley. And so it goes beyond that. And so what I've had an opportunity to see are communities around the country that get it, that they have to think about themselves in another way. 2 weeks ago, I was in Loveland, Colorado, about 70 miles north of Denver. And it was 10 years ago, a failing town of about 70,000 people. Had no major investment for years. The downtown was largely vacant. And this is a community that made a decision. There was a colleague of mine who had gone out there and spoke 10 years ago, made a decision that they wanted to be something other than what they were. They wanted to reimagine themselves. All their kids were moving to Fort Collins or Denver and Boulder, Colorado. They were all moving there. And the town was largely emptying out. It was becoming old people. And they made a decision they wanted. And so they invested in a theater in town. And then they began to work with developers to say, how do we partner with you to get to think about building there? If you go to Loveland today, it's a town with lots of restaurants and bars, and the commercial strip, the 3 or 4 blocks, actually there's not a vacant building there. But there's $100 million of construction going on in apartments and condos in the town, because people now made a choice, boomers and young people, that it's a great place to live, and they want to live there. And so, what do you need to do to make that happen? And this is our Pittsburgh story in part. You need money. You know, Pittsburgh was flat broke. There was not a city in America that had a worse budget than Pittsburgh when I was becoming mayor. It was junk bond status, and our pension funds were 12% funded. But we figured out where to find money. So when I go to talk to cities and they'd say, we want to do this or that, but we don't have any money, I say, you're lying to me, you have money. The question is, what are the choices you're going to make with the money you have, and how creative are you going to be at identifying other sources of money? The other is land control. When we made a decision in Pittsburgh to buy 1,500 acres of land in the first year I was mayor. So we bought Southside Works, and we bought that slag dump you saw for all of our lives as you came into Parkway. And we bought the old Sears building in East Liberty and a host of other buildings, because we felt that we needed to control the land to be able to get it into the marketplace. Sophisticated deal-making capacity, vision about where you want to go, and about who's the leader in all this. And it wasn't always the mayor. It was a lot of people. If you enjoy the cultural trust in downtown Pittsburgh, that was the foundation community that led that. We were partners, supportive partners with them, but they led that. And so there's lots of examples of that kind of leadership that takes place. And so I want you for a moment to reimagine the Mon Valley in Allegheny County. You have thousands of acres of vacant land. You have some wonderful things going on now in Braddock, in Swissvale, and you have good commercial strips that you can begin to think of. There's 186,000 people that live in Allegheny County, Mon Valley. That's a medium-sized town. But there's 35 towns. And I believe that you need to reimagine yourself in a different way. You're talking about 4 communities coming together. I would think, if I were all of you, I would want to create a rivers authority. that all of you would cooperate with, that you would think about the Urban Redevelopment Authority of Pittsburgh, that you would all agree to participate in. You would identify some financing. I would partner with the county on this. I'd go beat up Rich Fitzgerald to get this to happen, and to create a partnership that begins to think about how do you get the money, how do you think about the land control that you have, so that you can control your own destiny. Right now you're not doing that. But you're not going to do it individually as individuals, 35 communities. You need to rethink how that comes together. I'm not saying merge your communities, I'm saying create a rivers authority to make that happen. I've seen this happen, and I've seen cities that have reinvented themselves, from big cities like Denver and Seattle to smaller towns like Charleston and Loveland, Texas, and Greenville, South Carolina. Denver made a decision to raise taxes in 3 counties. It required voter approval, and the voters approved it by over 50% of the vote. And they raised almost $2 billion, and they built a 120-mile transit system. So I want you to picture the transit system coming to the Mon Valley, okay? And now there's 78 stations. If you go to those stations, there's huge amounts of development happening around those stations because people can hop on the transit. They don't drive anymore, and they ride transit into downtown Denver. And in Denver itself, there's a huge development called Union Station. If any of you have seen it, it was an abandoned railroad station with 20 or 30 acres of railroad yards around it. If you go there today, and this really just started probably 7 or 8 years ago, there's 3,500 apartments, several million square feet of retail, and how you make that happen is about being intentional. They made a decision to reimagine how Denver operated. In Greenville, South Carolina, which is half the size of the Mon Valley in terms of population, about 80,000 people, there was this highway bridge that the State Highway Department built over top of this waterfall, which was right in downtown Greenville. Have any of you been to Greenville? Pretty amazing place, isn't it? So that highway bridge was 4 lanes, and they put the 4-lane road off the highway bridge right through the middle of the town. They took out the parking, they narrowed the sidewalks, and the mayor, and so that bridge was there, and what happened? And that highway was there, Greenville died. I mean, all the buildings along that road were largely vacant. The retail buildings, not much going on because you couldn't even park there, and there was lots of traffic. And the mayor, about 15 years ago, a new mayor said, you know, I want to get rid of this bridge and we want to narrow this road. And people yelled at him and said, you know, how will we get through Greenville? And he said, that's the point. I don't want you to go through Greenville. I want you to stay here, right? And he tore the bridge down. And they narrowed the road to 1 lane in each way, and they put parking lanes in, and they widened the sidewalks. If you go to Greenville today, it is one of the really, and I have 2 people back there shaking their heads, it is one of the liveliest places you would want to see. Restaurants all along that dead road, a performing arts center, lots of apartment buildings. It's an incredibly sick. BMW made a decision to locate their corporate headquarters right near Greenville because Greenville reimagined themselves and got rid of the impediment that was affecting it. In my view, the best small city in America is Charleston. How many of you have been to Charleston? If you've been to Charleston, you know that Joe Rowley, who was mayor for 40 years, when Hurricane Hugo had destroyed a lot of the buildings in Charleston, and people said, well, we might as well tear these old buildings down. Joe Rowley, a 33-year-old mayor, brand new mayor, said, we're not tearing those buildings down over my dead body. Those buildings are going to define who we are. And he used historic preservation to create this remarkable city that brings hundreds of thousands of people to visit, and it's a great walkable city. And they have problems now with too many people wanting to live in Charleston. And it didn't happen by accident. It happened in a very intentional way because Joe Rowley and others in the town reimagined the city in a different kind of way. In Cincinnati, the same thing has happened, but I want to mention this because it's important to you. Cincinnati, with home to Procter & Gamble and Kroger's and other large companies, was declining badly in the downtown, and immediately next to downtown literally across the street from the Kroger's headquarters was a place called Over the Rhine. It was described as the worst neighborhood in America. It was largely vacant, and the corporate community, because the city wasn't acting, the corporate community said, we either are going to move our headquarters or we're going to do something about this, and they made a decision to do something about it, and they raised $50 million privately and decided to invest in Over the Rhine in their downtown, and they made a partnership with the city. And if you go there today, you will see the buildings that look like that now look like this. There's hundreds of units. There's actually, that $50 million has been parlayed into about $1.5 billion of development. Both sort of developments for the millennials, as well as the 3CDC, the organization who leads this effort, built 3 homeless shelters and has done hundreds of units of affordable housing also. So it didn't just simply run over the people that live there, it made investment, and that brings us to Pittsburgh. So you all lived this with me. When I was becoming mayor, we had gone through what was a unique moment in American history. We had lost more population than any city in America. We lost almost 400,000 people between 1970 and 1990. We've all lived that. Pittsburgh lost 60% of its population. We went from a population when I'm a young boy growing up in Pittsburgh of 620,000 people to 300,000 people. And the people that were leaving were largely our young people, because they couldn't see a future for themselves. And we became the second oldest county in America. Miami-Dade County is the oldest county by age in America, and it wasn't because we weren't the second oldest because people were retiring here. It was because our young people were leaving. And so when I'm becoming mayor, really it was a decision of whether we're going to continue to manage decline, which we were doing pretty well, or were we going to reimagine Pittsburgh? And none of this is an easy decision. So we had the Southside Steelworks. My father worked there for 51 years. You remember the Southside Steelworks down along Carson Street. It was 120 acres. We bought that property, and where there 10,000 men and women made steel, there's now a cheesecake factory. My father would shoot me if you were. But you know, there was opposition to that. People wanted to keep the mill because they thought maybe someday it would come back. And you know, Trump said it was going to come back, right? And it was never going to come back. And so we made a decision, but we built a public-private partnership. We probably have a dozen private developers that we work with. We invested public money in there. We built 4 garages because we didn't want one building with a big surface parking lot, so it's a much denser place. There's thousands of jobs tied to the technology economy there. We figured out how to do that even though we were flat broke. Because there's money to be had with good ideas. One for me that is, how many of you remember the old East Liberty and the new East Liberty? Yeah. So you remember the old East Liberty. There was an old Sears building there. As we were buying property, we bought the old Sears building. It was vacant for, I don't know, 10 or 15 years. And we looked at ourselves and said, what are we going to do with this? And we decided the best thing we could do with it is get a Home Depot to locate there. Now, in the mid-90s, there were no Home Depots in urban areas. They were all, and the closest Home Depot to East Liberty was in Monroeville. And we had, as you know, the 2 richest neighborhoods in Pittsburgh, Shadyside and Squirrel Hill, were on one side of East Liberty, and the 2 poorest neighborhoods were on the other side of East Liberty. And East Liberty was sort of this no man's land. It had largely been abandoned. And so we went to the Home Depot real estate people and said, tell us about, we would like to talk to you about locating a store there. And they laughed at us and said, it's not where we would put a store. So I called up my friends in the Jewish community in Pittsburgh and asked whether they would invite Bernie Marcus, who I called up first the mayor of Atlanta and said, tell me about the 2 guys at Home Depot. And they said, particularly Bernie Marcus, very philanthropic, and is also very active in national Jewish affairs. And so I called some friends in the Jewish community and said, could you invite Bernie Marcus to come to Pittsburgh for a dinner? And he did. And a friend hosted a reception for him in Squirrel Hill. And my bodyguard, I had a bodyguard at the time, he and I walked up to Bernie Marcus, and my bodyguard, who was a police officer, showed him his gun and said, "We're kidnapping you." This is a true story. And he said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, we need a half hour of your time. We think you can make our dreams come true if you come with us. So he came with us, and we drove him out to East Liberty. He said, "Boy, this would be a hard sell for us to put a store there." By the end of the evening, he came up and said, "We'll take a risk with you. We'll put a store there." From the day that store opened until today, it is the highest sales volume store of all the Home Depots in the Pittsburgh market. And then a young developer comes to us who has an option on one of the big old buildings. By the way, before we start this, 60% of the property in East Liberty was tax delinquent. You missed your opportunity. You should have bought that property then. But people didn't have any belief that anything of value was going to happen there. So a young guy had an option on an old warehouse there, and he came to us and said, "You know, I think I can get us in front of Whole Foods if you work with us just like you did at Home Depot." And so we went to Austin, Texas, and we got Steve Messides was the developer, and we got Whole Foods to commit to Pittsburgh. When the year it opened, it was the Rookie of the Year store, meaning it had the highest sales volume of any Whole Foods in the country. And more interestingly, it had the highest percentage of food stamps of any store in the country being used. Both Whole Foods and Home Depot made a real effort. So 80% of the people when the Home Depot opened were walking to work. They were walking from the neighborhood to work. So we worked really hard to make that connection. So part of it is creating the jobs. Part of it is making sure that people can get to the jobs. And so I don't need to tell you, we built a lot of housing in East Liberty. We did a lot of retail development. And as you know, Google was growing. I had two people 10 years ago working at CMU in a partnership with them. And they kept growing, and they were finally got too big in the CMU building on their campus. They said, "Where are we going to go?" And they go to East Liberty. So who would have imagined, so what's the connection between Home Depot and Google? Is that they together with Whole Foods and a lot of other things build a very vibrant, exciting kind of neighborhood where people now want to live. In fact, too much. We love it to death in a way. And so downtown was the other big thing. And this is a partnership with the Cultural Trust. That you all remember that block there, that rectangle there, the line, the blue line, is now we call the Cultural Trust District. But 25 years ago, there were 22 massage parlors and strip joints. You all remember those? Yeah, I remember. Now there's just one, and maybe every city needs one, right? But this was a partnership by the foundations. They made a decision, hired Hines, that this could be a cultural district. And there were two big vaudeville theaters. One was a strip joint, and the other was vacant, which now became Symphony, the Hines Hall, and the Benedum. And the Cultural Trust, has now probably a dozen venues down there. And there's the high school is there, the Performing Arts High School and Middle School for the city. Our son went to that school, and it created a great place. That happened, and as you know, when there's a baseball game, you can park downtown for $5, and if you park across the street in a parking lot, it's $4, right? That's $5. You're giving my age. So we created a cultural trust. You know what the rivers look like? How many of you went to see the duck? Who would have imagined? When I was growing up in Pittsburgh, my mother always said two things. Be home before the street lights come on, and she would say, always, never go near those rivers. We didn't live far from the rivers. She said, never go near those rivers. She said, if you go to those rivers, you're going to melt. And that was the history of Pittsburgh. And then I say, what were architects smoking and drinking in the 60s and 70s? Because we built Three River Stadium, this big concrete, but all around it was 30 acres of surface parking in a road right on the riverfront. And so when the Steelers lost the Super Bowl the one year, we blew it up. And we built a new football stadium and a new baseball park, which by everybody's Rankin is the best baseball park in America. As Tom mentioned, we built this new convention center. And let me just say, and I say this everywhere I go, is that Mike DeWita and Bob Cramner gave up their political careers to make this happen. The legislature, we were going to propose to raise the sales tax, and the legislature insisted we do a referendum, and 70% of the people in the region voted against it, and Mike and Bob and I, a month later, said, we have a plan B, we're going to do it without doing another referendum. And you know, people yelled at us and were mad at us about it, and just a month or so ago, I was speaking to 500 people at Heinz Field in that big glass overlooking the city. It was a pretty day, and I said, don't you love this? Isn't it beautiful, all the new development over here? And people all clapped, and I said, so how many of you voted against it? I said, raise your hand, and not one person raised it. I said, so 70% of you are lying to me, because 70% of you voted against it. And the city's controller recently did a performance audit at 15 years after those stadiums opened. What did it do? And this is what it did. It's created $1.5 billion of new development besides the stadiums. It's generating $20 million of new revenue for the city. And the city's investment itself in it was less than $1 million. So we kept our baseball park, our baseball team, we kept our, I wish they'd be better, we kept our hockey team, which was going to try to leave because when they went into bankruptcy, but they're here. And we created a new vibrant area in Pittsburgh. That's that riverfront now. We took the road off the river and opened it up and created a vibrant place. The other thing we dealt with was public housing. You have a lot of public housing in the Mon Valley, and we had 12% of Pittsburgh's population lives in public housing, 35,000 people. And we made a decision that we needed to treat public housing in a different kind of way because it was very isolated. And this is Aliquippa Terrace, large communities built in 1939 had not changed. And so we made a decision to engage with public housing residents to fundamentally change how we thought public housing ought to be run and how it ought to look. And if you've been up to where Aliquippa Terrace was, now it's called Oak Hill. And so part of the deal was to build new buildings that were more attractive and it would be mixed income, but the other would be, and we gave everybody who lived in public housing the right to return. The other piece was to connect people who lived in public housing into what was beginning to happen in Pittsburgh, whether it was the PNC Operations Center or the Home Depot, of connecting into the opportunities for jobs. And then the final one I want to mention is which we've seen all of our lives as you drive in the Parkway, as you go into the Squirrel Tunnel. We saw the slag dump. It looked like the moon, right? And that had been there for 90 years, and we made a decision to buy that. People thought we were crazy. And we buy it, and we partnered with developers. And now if you go up there, I hope you've driven down through Somerset at Frick Park. You know, there's 700 homes there. Some of them are selling for more than $1 million. And what we discovered was that people wanted to live in the city, but they wanted new housing. They didn't want to buy. This is the first new big housing development in Pittsburgh in 50 years. And so we could not build these houses fast enough. There was a long waiting list for them, and it really proved that there was a whole market. We added, of the 250-acre slag dump, we added 150 acres to Frick Park to carry it all the way down to the Mon River. And then the other was that the thing I'm proudest of is the trails we've created in Pittsburgh. I don't know how many of you are bike riders or walkers, but we went from having only about a mile or two of public access to our waterfronts to now having almost 30 miles of access in the city itself. And as you know, you can go all the way from Pittsburgh to Washington on a remarkable bike trip, which I've had an opportunity to do. So don't tell me you don't have the money. We didn't have the money. The whole conversation will always stop there. We'd love to do this, we'd love to do that, but we don't have the money. The conversation stops. Imagine that you have the money. Create the idea first. So I want to, and when you build things, think about this. You remember, right, critical place, a little thing, but a critical place in Pittsburgh. Cathedral of Learning, right here. Over there, Shinley Park. On this side, Carnegie Museum. On this side, Pitt School surface parking lot. Been there for 30 years. And so we said, we can do better than that. To the entrance to a great university, to a great park, to a great museum, to a great law school, we can do better than a surface parking lot. And so we, working with the Pitt and others, we proposed to eliminate the parking lot. And of course, I got 600 letters from people saying, I'll never vote for it again if you take away my parking space, right? But I said, you'll get over it, figure it out somewhere, right? And so if you go there today, what you see is a carousel, you see a nice little restaurant, you see a big lot on a nice summer day, a nice fall day. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of people sitting around. Students go there to study. It changes the sense of what you are. So when you're going to build something, don't build a sort of mediocre, it'll do kind of use. Think about this is how we're going to define ourselves. You know, and we find it. We did the Allegheny regional asset tax that, you know, helped the parks and helped the libraries, and everybody was against it. I don't know that anybody would be against that one either, because it's done so much for our region. We are certainly in the top 15 cities in America that are creating startup companies and attracting venture capital. 60% of the venture capital in America goes to Silicon Valley. Another 10 or 20% goes to the Boston area. So we're fighting for a piece of it, and we're doing okay. And that venture capital is what starts a lot of little companies. So we're looking at anywhere from 30 to 40 startup companies a year now in Pittsburgh, which is a really pretty impressive rate. And if you think over a 10-year period, that's 400 companies that are starting and growing in Pittsburgh because of this, because of the research dollars going to the University of Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon, and the ability to leverage that into commercial developments. This is financing. You don't need to memorize it. It's what we call tax increment financing. We did a lot of that, which is to say you take the property taxes are here, but if development happens, it raises the property taxes, development, and we can capture some of that and use it to do the necessary improvements in infrastructure to make the development happen. We did $338 million worth of tax increment financing, and it has generated now about $4 billion worth of development. So how you make a decision about raising money, and one of the other ways we raise money was very controversial. We reduced the city's workforce by about 150 people shortly after I became mayor. We diverted $6 million out of our operating budget. My budget people were nuts. You got a pension problem, you got junk bond status, and we diverted the finance a $60 million development fund that gave us the ability to buy land, that gave us the ability to partner with developers. That fund, since we created it, has turned over 4 times, meaning we put the money into deals, they got paid back, and it's turned over again. So I want to move on. We're sitting at a place where the world's changing, and you guys have a choice to make. You can keep doing things as you're doing them, and sort of incrementally see some improvements, and I see those improvements. Chuck and Tom took me on a tour, and I've seen some great new investments happening in the Mon Valley. But you need to move faster, and part of that is where do you get the money, and how do you get the money, and how do you control your own destiny. I think if you come together, you can do that in a better way, and I'm happy to work with you to think about how we did financing. So there's lots of sources. There's tax increment financing, there's new market tax credits, there's historic tax credits, there's a new program that has huge opportunity that many of your areas are in, called Opportunity Zones, which provides new sources of financing for this area. The question is how you put all that together. And that's what every community I go to, whether it was Loveland or Volkswagen's in Wolfsburg, the fundamental issue, it is not about the money, and always there's going to be 100 people telling you it's the wrong place, why don't you invest over here rather than over there. It's not about any of that stuff. It's really whether you have the political and community will to kick the door down, to change your behavior, and to think about yourselves in a different kind of way. We had to face that in Pittsburgh. And we did it. It was difficult. There was lots of controversy. You might remember some of those. But at the end of the day, we reimagined Pittsburgh, and it is now a different city. And I'll end on this, is that this is your moment. Pittsburgh is booming. And you have the ability in Swissvale or Braddock or a lot of other communities to Rankin, to reposition yourself to take advantage of the changes that are happening. Pittsburgh's getting too expensive. You know, Lawrenceville is $400,000 for a house, a little row house. Who could have imagined, right? And so the question for all of you is, are you going to figure out how to take advantage of, for the first time in 50 years, we are growing again. And we're attracting young people in one of the highest rates of any place in America. And they would look to the Mon Valley if you define a really exciting strategy for them. And think about all the vacant land and how you begin to get control of that land and reimagine what it would be, rather than sitting there as it is vacant. You're seeing pieces of that happen. Chuck's leadership, Tom's leadership, others in the room, your leadership is making some of that happen. But now you need to have that sense of urgency and boldness. Kick the door down. Thank you.
Mayor Murphy. Mayor Murphy. I'm glad you asked me to say something.
Introduce yourself.
My name is Michael.
Hi,
Michael Aldridge. I do agree with you. I do agree with you. The things that are going on in East Liberty, Lawrenceville, you know, in those areas, South Side. You have gone into a store and had to pull the number out of a machine and wait till your number was called. Am I correct?
Yeah.
You remember those days?
I do.
You go into a meat market or whatever. I feel this area has pulled a number, and we are standing behind downtown Pittsburgh, South Side, now Hazelwood. Will we live long enough for it come here? Now, my opinion...
Michael, that's your choice.
No, let me hear.
It's your choice.
The City of Pittsburgh Redevelopment Authority controls a lot of this property. You, as former mayor, could you tell us how to make them move? You've built a beautiful ramp going down into the Cary Furnace site. I'm sure they took
That's
you
the
in that
county.
area.
That's not the
It's
city.
the county.
It's the county.
Well, the county redevelopment authority. But as former mayor, can you tell us how we can make them move, that we can do things? These guys do have a lot of great ideas. The enterprise zone, we couldn't have a better person helping us than Tom McClovich. He's been an excellent behind-the-scene man.
Michael,
and whatever.
it's about you guys organizing and being clear what you want. What I learned look, when I was mayor, developers would come to Pittsburgh and say, Mayor, I have a great idea for you. And I would say, with all due respect, tell us why it's a great idea for you, and we'll decide whether it's a great idea for us. And if our self-interests come together, we'll figure out how to make it work. We'll take the risk with you.
Evan, you had a question.
You have not defined that vision of what you want. Yes.
So a lot of times when you throw out the vision of what you want for the different communities or what the community wants for itself, you find it's not just the dollars that are the obstacle. It's sometimes the obstacle are the individuals that live in the communities that say, my taxes are going to go up. I don't want gentrification. I think there's solutions to those problems, but I think that's the paralyzing factor for some of these communities. Can you speak to...
Yeah, I had this remarkable week that I will always remember. On Tuesday night, we met in Aliquippa Terrace, and 300 residents of Aliquippa Terrace, 1,700 unit public housing community, showed up, and they actually threw chairs at me. Because we had proposed that we were going to tear down Aliquippa Terrace, and they did not trust that we would ever, they thought we'd sell the land to Pitt and they would never have a place to live. We'd just abandon them, okay? And it ended up working out well. And we spent a lot of time working with the tenants to build that trust. And eventually they said, we trust you, let's go. And we did what you see up there today. That Thursday night, we had just bought the slag dump. And I'm thinking people in Squirrel Hill are going to love me. They've been living with this and we go to the first meeting about the slag dump, proposing to build of the 250 acres, 700 new houses, and 150 acres in a new park. 200 people showed up, and they all wanted to keep the slag dump. True story.
They don't like change.
It's about change. And it's about meeting with people, looking them in the eye, and talking to them. But at the end of the day, my experience is there's always going to be a few skeptics, and you need to run over them.
One of the strategies that you had mentioned once before was to actually talk to the community and have the community recognize they needed to freeze the tax base of the current residents and also set aside land in order to be able to ensure that there was low-income housing for those renters.
Right.
And that possibly was a strategy to overcome the obstacles of people not being able to envision the future because they were so fearful of what they could potentially lose.
Well, when Mike and Tom and I were in the legislature, we passed legislation that for people in defined gentrifying areas, if they owned a house, you would freeze their property taxes at a base year so that it would never go up for as long as they lived in it. And it would never have to be paid back once they either sold their house or died. So for owners like that. And then the other is to have a plan to do affordable housing so that you are addressing that whole issue. And we did that in East Liberty, and we partnered with some affordable housing developers and in the Hill District. And so if you see what went on in Bedford dwellings and so we were very focused, but that's all about intentionality, and it's all about knowing what you want. And what I believe, you might throw me out of the room, you are doing great work, you're very energetic, but I hear a lot of frustration because in effect you've turned yourself into waiting for somebody else to make the decision. And I think that you all together, sitting in this room, if you came together and horse traded among yourselves and set out a very dynamic vision and set out a strategy. So somebody's going to go first and somebody's going to go third or fourth, and you need to agree on that and you speak with one voice. I think you can change the conversation here. Because what's going on, and I wouldn't have been able to say this 10 years ago, but what is going on in Pittsburgh now can happen out here. It doesn't have to go first to Hazelwood. They might never get their act together, the foundations to develop that Hazelwood site. It's been 15 years and they still haven't figured it out. And some of you, Rankin and with the Cary Furnaces or Duquesne, they all represent, I've been coming out here for years. I ride the trail. I see that represents opportunities. In Rankin, I have a friend who lives in Rankin. Some of you know the Regos. She was on council. I go visit Mrs. Rego Mayor, and that whole street, half the houses are vacant. I see that. You might see that as a liability. I see it as an opportunity. And what we did in the city was say, you know what, if they're vacant and tax delinquent and people walked away from them, let's put them together. Let's get them and begin to market them to these tech people, sell them for $1. And tie some loan, work with a bank. We did this on the north side a long time ago when nobody wanted to live on the north side, and wrap around it a mortgage and some fund money to do rehab and require them to live in it for 2 years. You'll change the conversation about these neighborhoods. It's beginning to happen in Braddock, and it's beginning to happen in some of the developments Chuck's doing. But it means you thinking about this in a different kind of way, instead of waiting for somebody else to define your agenda. You need to define the agenda. That's the choice we made in Pittsburgh. It was controversial. But at the end of the day, 10 years later, it looks like a different city. That's the challenge that you all have. And I'd love to work with you on it.
Okay. Well, that's just the point I was going to make. The Urban Land Institute, is that an instrument that we could use here to help?
I think we could help you define a strategy. We've done some work in McKees Rocks, actually, which is another community I think has the same kind of opportunity. It's 10 minutes from downtown Pittsburgh, and they are in the same place you are right now.
Any other questions? Let's thank Tom. One more, Bob.
Yeah.
The owner of Peppers and Ad.
I go there, the mayor. I tell them though, I've been down there maybe half a dozen times. So I'm hanging out in the Mon Valley. I don't go out to dinner much, and I'm going there more than any place else.
Bob, you have a question?
Yeah, and maybe Bill, anybody can speak to this. Terry Furnace development, what's happening? I mean, I know Amazon rumors and they're waiting to see.
I can tell you they're holding it
Yeah,
till Amazon makes a decision.
yeah.
And then they have, I guess, developments that they want to do if Amazon goes somewhere else.
So does the plan B, Bill?
Yeah, but
Yeah, well, the county executive has promised to a group of public officials and other
Yeah.
development
The
people.
day
here
after
that-
we know that RFP goes out.
There it is. The day after, they said they prepared a request for development proposals, and they have developers who are interested in developing the property. I think mostly, we've been talking about, it would be for light industrial, it would be more retail, would not be housing necessarily. So, and we had everybody that needed to be there.
I gotta leave.
You gotta go.
I got another commitment.
Thank you.